and only about half of them believe that it's possible to pursue a career in their preferred industry in the area where they live. So those results highlight that many teenagers are really worried about their ability to get a job and also about their ability to achieve their career goals. So today we're going to be hearing from Rebekha Sharkie, who's the Executive Officer from the Youth Connections National Network. And Rebekha is going to take us through a little bit about the Youth Connections program, and she'll also report to us the findings of a recent study that the Youth Connections National Network has done on people who participated in the program. And then she will outline a vision for a future national youth transition service, which is aimed at helping disengaged young people to ensure that they make successful transitions from school to employment in the future. So Rebekha, I might throw to you now.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody to this webinar, and thank you very much to Jobs Australia for inviting the Youth Connections National Network to the webinar. I think what we might start with, we're on the Youth Connections slide now. I think if we could start with a bit of a poll, if I could find out from those who are listening in, who is a Youth Connections provider, and that will sort of give me a bit of an idea on how to tailor this webinar. We almost need some thinking music, Peter.
That's right.
We're up to about 81% voted. We might just wait for a couple more to come in. Yeah, we're at about 93, so I think that's good. I might actually stop that and show everyone the results.
Okay, all right, so quite a few of you are Youth Connections providers. All right, that's great. Well, going back to our presentation that we've got, I can't see it. There we go, lovely. Well, that would mean that many of you would know about Youth Connections, so just see if we can... Okay, so the program commenced in January 2010. As many of you know, there's 65 different providers in 113 regions. Yesterday I asked the Department of Education what their latest figures were, and we have 74,000 young people that have gone through and been assisted by the Youth Connections program. One of the highlights of our program is that it has connected very well with Indigenous communities, not just from an engagement side. So we have around 20% of our client load identifying themselves as being of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander heritage, but from an outcomes perspective. So we have nearly 50% of Indigenous young people that go through the Youth Connections program complete the program with a final outcome. And a final outcome is measured as 13 weeks of continuous connection to either education or employment or further training. I have up there that our program is for young people aged 13 to 19. This does slightly differ state to state. So in New South Wales, the age range is around 11 to 19, and in Tasmania in particular, it's much, much lower. So when I've gone to visit young people in Tasmania, when I've visited providers, it's quite regular to see young people aged even 10 and 11 connecting into Youth Connections. The program did receive a year's extension up until the 31st of December 2014, but funding for after that date we don't know. It was under DEWA under the previous government. It's now a Department of Education program, and it's under the guidance of Senator Scott Ryan, who sits under Minister Pyne, and Scott Ryan is Parliamentary Secretary. So that's really a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the actual program. For those who are Youth Connections providers, they know how the connection levels work. Connection level 2B are the young people who have had a long period of disengagement from education, and for many states we're finding that that is the area where Youth Connections providers are moving to get the greatest number of young people. Whereas in Tasmania, often because of age issues, you're looking more at Youth Connections level 1. And that's your age range of participants. So as you can see, it's that middle teenage years, that's the bulk of the actual Youth Connections clientele. We do find that young people, when they were completing the shout-out surveys last year, which were, I guess you could say, summits that we held all around Australia, the majority of them said that they started to have difficulties at school in that transition between primary school and high school around age 13 to 14, depending on where they were living. And looking at the different barriers that when young people join the program, what they say are their main barriers. Low self-esteem and bullying are two of the main issues. And having sort of non-vocational barriers, so possibly difficulties at home, a lot of responsibility of being a young carer, whether that's a young carer to their parents, to their own children or to other family members. That is certainly something that's quite common with a lot of our Youth Connections clients. And we also know that a lot of our young people are no longer living at home and they're in alternative care or in the care of other family members or friends. Now this is a new stat that I got yesterday from the Department of Education, and I haven't actually seen this in my couple of years with the program. And I thought that it was quite relevant for today's chat, particularly about the engaged in employment. So this is the young people that have gone through the Youth Connections program and what were their final outcomes achieved. So obviously there's very much a focus on commencing education or re-engaging in education, but for nearly 3,500 young people, there has been a connection into employment. So the Youth Connections National Network has been quite busy writing a number of papers. When I came on board, we were just finishing off the remote communities, what works in remote communities, and also the good practice strengthening services for youth and juvenile justice. Both of those are available on the YAT website, or if you'd like copies of them, just send me an email and I'm happy to send a copy to you. In January this year, we wrote The Space in Between, which was future policy directions for youth at risk, and we really looked at the broad spectrum from about age 12 to 25 and what we saw the needs and the good things from the Youth Connections, the current Youth Connections program, and how we could shape them into the future. And that paper was really, I guess, the paper that sits behind Outside the School Gate, which I'll get to in a minute. And the other thing that we have worked on is some destination data. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about the destination data and why we decided to write that and to explore where our young people were in 2011. Peter, oh, sorry. I was going to say it wasn't flicking over fully. Okay, right. The destination data, when we took the paper, The Space in Between, out to decision makers, so out to politicians, and said, look, you know, this is what we see as being really good for the future, and we think that there should still be a program for Youth Connections, but even maybe making it for younger people and for older people. They said to us, well, what has been the benefit of the current Youth Connections program? And we said, well, you know, the outcomes are very good. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people, you're looking at around 50% that receive a final outcome. And for the broader population, it's sitting at around 60 to 70%. It depends where the young people are based. And they said, yes, but where are the young people now? So in July this year, we decided to go back out to providers, and if any of the providers are listening that went and asked their young people who were in 2011, thank you for gathering that data. We asked them to go back and just see a snapshot in time in July what the young people who are on the program 2011 are doing now. What we found was that 6 months after exiting Youth Connections with a final outcome, 94.2% were still engaged in employment or education. And 2 years on for that for many, for some it was only 18 months depending on what time in 2011 they commenced on the program, we found that 81.5% were still in education or employment. Nearly 2 years on, 17 had recorded either a traineeship or an apprenticeship, and the majority were not receiving any Commonwealth financial assistance, so Centrelink payments, even though a fairly significant amount were not living at home. So I can't remember the stats off my head, but I think it's somewhere around 20–25% are no longer living in a family home. A number of the young people were already partnered and living in domestic relationships. Quite a significant number were living alone, or others were in boarding situations with other young people. Of those that we gathered the stats from, which was 206 young people that we surveyed, 128, so the majority were disconnected and not attending school, and 22 of which were disengaged for more than 1 year. So they had a significant level of disconnection from school. So we felt that this has been a good way to show to those who back in February said, well, where are they now? This is what they're doing now. The department has recently said that they would like us to possibly expand on this data. So we might be, the next paper that we write might be looking at those who were on the program in 2012, so where the class of 2012 is right now. So moving on to the reason why we all joined the webinar, outside the school gate, we wrote this paper, and this paper's had a lot of different versions to it. We started writing this back in May, and the impetus for writing the paper was really the stats that, as Peter mentioned earlier, young people who are not transitioning well into employment, that number is growing. So the stats that we've been able to get from government are that 360,000 young people are not in full-time education or employment, and a further 310,000 are underemployed and might only be working 1 or 2 hours a week. I believe that 360,000 figure has now enlarged to around 380,000. So while attainment levels to Year 12 are improving, transitioning into employment for many young people is not. So we found, as a Youth Connections organisation, and an organisation that works primarily, well, entirely with young people, that we see that there's a real policy shortfall for young people, particularly early school leavers and those who are not employment ready. And our experience is that those early school leavers are not coping well in the JSA system. We're not saying that all young people are not coping well in the JSA system, but particularly those who present with multiple barriers, who perhaps have not had a good educational experience, those who are early school leavers. We believe that they need intensive assistance in order to get the skills, the employability skills needed to then make that successful transition. So we're calling in our paper for a national specialist activation and transition service that works with young people who are aged 17 to 24. And we want to work with them in the way that we work with young people now on the Youth Connections program. We believe that intensive early up assistance through looking at our destination data can create that long-term benefit so that young people get those skills up, can then work with a JSA provider and hopefully get into sustainable long-term employment futures. So that's really what our paper is saying as a summary. We're not saying that those who are under 17 don't continue to need assistance in order to engage, in order to become active, but this paper is really focusing on those who are in that older cohort. So the key components of outside the school gate, we believe that it needs to be a national youth specialist service. I think the concept of it being national means that young people all over Australia will be able to access the same service. If it's broken down into state or regional differences, there is a chance that some young people won't have that access and that there'll be different levels of investment by state to state depending on their own state's financial capability. We do believe it needs to be a youth specialist service. Youth connections providers tend to be youth workers or social workers or people who have worked with young people for a long period of time, so they understand how to work well with young people and how to get the most out of young people and how to really communicate very well in that space. We believe, like the current Youth Connections program, that should be place-based, so we're a capped program of 30,000 nationally, and we do believe that there's a lot of benefit, like the current program, for it to be delivered locally by community providers. There's certainly a lot of providers that, because of their innate understanding of their own communities, are able to do a huge amount of work and have a lot of trust in their own community, particularly in remote areas, to get really good outcomes for young people. We believe that the program should have a lot of flexibility in it, so that in regional and remote locations, providers are able to work with young people perhaps differently, whatever works best in their area, to get those outcomes for young people. And like the current program, partnerships within the community to deliver those youth specialist services, so wraparound programs. So if a young person comes to the program and they're presenting with mental health issues or homeless issues, that they're able to connecting with other services to get that all of the needs addressed. And we have opened it up to all those under 24 who are unemployed, underemployed, disengaged, inactive, multiple barriers, who are not work ready. And like the current Youth Connections program, having an open referral service seems to work well. So now in the Youth Connections service, you can be referred by Centrelink, you can be referred by Headspace, you can be referred by a friend, you can self-refer, family or school. And a bit of a program summary. These are the things that we felt were the different components needed in order for a young person to get the skills, those pre-employability skills, to then connecting with a JSA to then get employment. So obviously individualised case management plan, and that's a key component of the current program. So that's working with the young person for them to work out what their barriers are and how they think that they can address, what steps need to be needed to address them. A wraparound service, as I mentioned before, so connecting with other specialist agencies to assist that young person, and to focus on skill development. So connecting to training to become employment ready, material funding, they might need some work clothes to get work ready or other things. And that can also include things like gaining some work experience and career development. So lots of individual group work. We know that young people like to work in small groups. It's less confrontational. Connecting in with literacy and numeracy programs. So that's really where we're looking at for what we think is needed for young people to activate them and to get them into employment. We know, looking at Europe, that rapid activation is certainly a key component in success in Europe. a young person gets picked up very, very quickly, and they're not left to sit at home for months on end wondering what the next step is in their life. So if you'd like some more information or opening up to some questions, I'm all ears.
All right, thank you for your presentation, Rebekha. While we're waiting for some questions to be typed in, or people can even put up, you need to put up your hand if you'd perhaps like to ask us a question. You can speak and broadcast to everybody online. Well, otherwise, you can just type in your question if you'd prefer to do that. But while we're just waiting for that, I thought I might just ask a question, Rebekha. What do you think is the risk of the Commonwealth Government, pulling out of this space at the end of 2014 and deciding we don't really want to fund a national youth transition service to support young people? What do you think are the risks of that? And I suppose I'm thinking that with some evaluations that have of Youth Connections that have taken place, and I know that there's a third and final evaluation that we're all kind of waiting with bated breath to see. So yes, I'm keen to know what you think. What are the risks if the government pulls out of this space?
Well, I mean, you don't want to sound like, the sky's going to fall, but it's 30,000 young people a year that are assisted with Youth Connections. And in many regional areas, that's a very large proportion of the young people in those areas. If we don't provide the assistance to reconnect back into education or into employment, I think the numbers that we've seen of 360,000 will continue to grow. There is a lot of talk about, well, we're going to be giving the states extra funding for education. So for those who are still of compulsory school age, I guess it'll be an argument between the state and the Commonwealth over who's going to fund those young people, but there's certainly a need, and I think very much a growing need, to continue to support young people under 17. Particularly when you're looking at, we do 30,000 young people a year on the program. We assist 30,000 young people, but the unmet demand could easily add nearly 100,000 more young people to that group that could use the services of Youth Connections but are unable to connect and are on the waiting list. Providers do a very good job of assisting young people in other areas. So even if they can't get them onto their books for intensive as a case managed client, they do a lot of group work with them and assist them in other ways while they're waiting to get them onto their program. This time of year, pretty much every provider's completely full. For those over 17, I would be astounded if our government would be different to other governments around the world, in the sense that Europe, as a European Union, has given so much emphasis to the needs of young people that they've created a job guarantee, a youth guarantee, which I think was signed off last April, and that really did highlight the need for young people to very quickly be scooped up and activated and transitioned into employment, even the point of giving them a permanent, sorry, not a permanent, but an employed position, so that the wage scarring and being inactive for a long period of time does not continue to grow. It is a growing concern for our nation, and particularly in an ageing population. We need every single young person under 25 to be excited, active, doing what they want to do, and contributing to our economy and our community.
All right, we've got a question.
It makes good sense.
It does. We've got a question now from Amanda Corwell-Smith. Amanda, could you please go ahead?
Hello, Amanda, are you there?
So,
We might have to ask Amanda to type that in.
all right. Yes. So, if you could please type your question in, Amanda. We have
I would
also.
like to just.
Sorry. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Sorry, Pal. I was just going to touch upon what I was talking about earlier in relation to Europe. And I think the Australian community in the future needs to think about how we see young people and how we need to invest in them, because the idea in Europe is very much about young people are a great investment. They're needed by the entire community. The corporate world sees that they have a great role to play in transitioning young people and getting them careers. So I think that we as a broader community, as well as just the government decision makers, have a role to play in not seeing young people as a problem, but seeing them as a future solution.
Mm. All right. Okay. Now we also have with us the Manager of Policy here at Jobs Australia, May Lamb. May, did you have a question?
Hi, Rebecca.
Hello, May.
Before I start, I'd like to encourage people to raise their hand or send in questions, because it's a great opportunity to have a conversation. And I know that for some people maybe this webinar process is a bit new to you, but it's pretty easy to use. So have a go. I guess I'm trying to urge you to do that, because we really want to use this. It's so easy to set them up, and so terrific to have people contributing, that you might as well get some practice, because I think it's pretty much the way of the future. We've got one question that Melanie has put, which is asking if everyone could be emailed copies of the slides. And yes, that's always what we do with webinars. We make the slides available, and we also provide the recording for people, so that if you want to tell somebody else about this, then you can send them the link and the information, and it can be viewed later. And also the paper outside the school gate will be available from Youth Connections National Network.
So we'll get a copy of that from you, Rebecca, and make that available if that's okay with you.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I can actually make copies available to you of that and the destination data as well.
Fantastic.
So while we're waiting for more questions, I'm going to put my question. Rebecca, you talked about the success of activation policies in Europe, and I see that your paper proposes that Youth Connections providers are also given the status of a requirement to be attended by the young person upon referral. At the moment, participation is voluntary. Can you just talk a little bit about how you think that that would work based on what you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. We actually got that idea from Europe. In Europe, with the new European Union Youth Guarantee, they saw that it went hand in hand. If a young person is receiving Centrelink benefits, well, their version of welfare benefits, that there should be the requirement of young people to have an active role in their own engagement, in their own transition. So that's sort of slightly where we got that idea from. Also, that is we're in a changed government, and a government that so far has talked about, prior to coming into government, things like boot camps. So we rather than just a stick approach, we thought that might be a bit of a carrot and stick approach, but very much about young people feeling that they have a role to play, and a compulsory role to play in their own future, that they're not passive to this process.
Rebecca, can I just add to that that position my own investigations into a variety of programs like Work for the Dole and in the UK a program to compel attendance for lone parents or people with disabilities. And I think it's really useful to separate mandated attendance between being compelled to turn up and find out what's on offer, from, you know, a compliance regime that can be punitive and potentially negative. So there are different ways, you know, there are ways and ways to, you know, to require people to compel, and there's quite a lot of pretty solid evidence that says, you know, people up front don't think that they want to have a, you know, a required attendance, you know, sort of sword hanging over their heads and get their dole chopped if they don't do it. However, there's quite a bit of before and after change of heart on that. And so it goes to the question about what's the quality of the interaction and the experience. We have a question, we have a question coming in from Lisa. Lisa, you get the chocolate frog for putting a question. And the question I'll read out for everyone is that now the paper's been launched, what are the next steps for the national network with this proposal?
Okay, well, I mean, the paper has been launched, but we're going to be continuing to share this paper. And as I've mentioned during the webinar, the department is looking at perhaps a larger destination data. We really want, this is the start of a conversation, and we really want this conversation to continue well beyond the budget process, whatever happens with the budget in May. The more people that are talking about the needs of young people under 25, I can only see that as a positive thing. If we had, I mean, what have we got? 40% of people who are currently looking for a job are under 25. If that was a national all-age statistic, it would be on the front page of every newspaper every day. And it's not. It is an issue that is, I don't think, gets the media coverage and the community coverage that it deserves. These are our future taxpayers. As we all get older and older, and we are, well, for those who are of an age that will be able to get a pension one day, we will be looking to this group of young people to support us. So we need to have every one of them active, engaged, excited about their future and contributing to Australia's productivity.
Thanks, Rebekha. We've got the questions flooding in. This is fantastic. So we'll try and make sure we get to all your questions. The first one is from Amanda, who had her hand up before. Thanks, Amanda, for your question. It's mental illness is clearly an issue among young people currently and is arguably a hidden epidemic, and it overlaps with disengagement. So what are your thoughts on whether there should be more synergy between youth connections and DES providers to improve services to these people?
Right. Well, I think as a national network, we feel that the more connections there are between YC and DES and Headspace and all of the different, that's why we're very keen on a wraparound service, so that a youth connections provider who sits in their community that has a young person, or whatever the future program might be called, has such strong connections with all of the other providers in their area, because as anyone who does work with young people, if a young person comes in and they don't have a secure place to live, it's not just a homeless issue. You know, people have multiple layers of barriers that need to be addressed. So the more we can do to provide a wraparound service to address as many of those barriers, it can only work better and better. And we know that you don't just have a mental health issue alone, or you just don't, you know, it's multiple layering of issues in a person's life that then can lead to the inactivity, the disengagement, the staying in the bedroom, and not knowing where to turn next.
Okay, thanks, Rebekha. I'm going to go to Wayne's question next. Wayne says, while I understand the reason for the change in focus to 17 to 24-year-olds, in brackets education, does the government understand that it's at the expense of the 13 to 17-year-olds that the stats show are the highest success rates for youth connections? Could you comment on that?
Well, I'm a bit sort of slightly confused in the sense of the government part of that question. Certainly as a national network, we've written this paper because we saw the 17 to 24-year-olds as having, in current Australian policy, we saw that there was a shortfall for that cohort, for young people who don't have a strong educational background, who are not coping in the JSA system. But we're not saying as a Youth Connections National Network that those who are under 17 who are still of compulsory school age don't have needs. We will continue to advocate for our current program with the current government and with the opposition. It's been a highly successful program. Those who are providers have got an immense wealth of knowledge. It will be a great shame if the program ends and there's nothing for young people under 17. That not only for the young person but also for that immense knowledge that's been gathered by the sharing between providers. It's quite an unusual program in the sense that it's not competitive. So at national networks and at state networks, providers do get together and very much share ideas, programs, professional development. It's very collaborative approach, and I would like to think that something like that can continue. And certainly, whether it's funded by a state or funded by the federal government, there needs to be assistance for young people under 17. Whether they're, just because they're of compulsory school age does not mean that they are attending school. And we will keep advocating for that to both state government and to federal government. We're talking to everyone.
Just in relation to Wayne's question, I wonder whether, because he's obviously concerned about the withdrawal of possible withdrawal of support to the 13 to 17-year-olds who may be disengaging from school. I wonder whether there may be a view in the Commonwealth Government that the Gonski or Better Schools Plan funding is intended to be picking up these 13 to 17-year-olds. They're getting extra funding to retain those. It's a needs-based system with funding attached to students according to their individual needs. I wonder whether there's a view that that's becoming more of a school responsibility for that reason.
Well, I mean that's really an argument for the state and federal education ministers to have. Whether some of that funding is held back for young people who are disengaged and continues to be a federal government patch, or whether when the federal government is handing that funds to the states, it says, well, you will need to fund. We have talked about in our paper the possibility of the state governments buying into a federal envelope. So we have the Youth Connections Network now, whether state governments could buy in blocks for under 17s to continue to provide the current service. Certainly, it's a real challenge with so many areas, I think, of current public policy where there is this shifting of costs and blame between the two, and it's quite frustrating because ultimately in the end all of us want to see all young people who are not doing well in Australia to do well. Now, whether that comes from a federal bucket that's then transferred to the states, or from a federal bucket that stays in a federal bucket, or a state bucket, we will advocate for all buckets to spend on young people.
Yeah.
We can have that argument. We can come up with ideas, as we're doing when we're talking to state ministers as well as federal ministers and federal MPs about the needs of young people. My real concern is that there will be is about nothing happening for young people after December 2014, and I think we need to be realistic that that is a possibility. There is nothing in the forward estimates, so we need to keep advocating, and we will until the very end of the program.
Thanks, Rebekha. Just at this point, I've still got a couple of questions to go, so thank you for waiting with your questions. It's probably worth pointing out, for anybody who might not have known about it, that we had a webinar late last week with a Melbourne metropolitan provider called Youth Connect, and Youth Connect have had pretty good success, and they're on the path to really developing a terrific sustainable, more financially viable service to selling youth transitions and careers information and advice services into schools. So they've been working with quite a number of schools and are charging for those services, not only to schools but sometimes to parents, and working to employers pretty well. And it was a really good example of, you know, the ways that not-for-profit organisations that are mission-driven can use the existing knowledge, experience, skills and collateral that they have to strike out on their own and, you know, become sort of more self-funded. So if you missed that, then you can contact us for information about that webinar too, because it's been recorded. I'm going to go to Matthew's question now. Matthew, I hope I get your question right in the way that I read it. In the regional areas that our contract works with, and with the changes to the youth support program, there's a focus to work with the schools, especially the P to 10 schools, to re-engage and sustain the students in the school due to the very limited outside education options locally. So how do we maintain the areas like this that might slip through if our age range were to increase? Are there stats federally around this issue?
I'm not aware of any stats that I can get hold of from the Department of Education. Look, Matthew, it's really going to be the willingness of government, to work to continue to fund and support young people. In an ideal world, I see the current Youth Connections program continuing and a new program building on what we know works with Youth Connections for those who are 17 to 24. And that's what we are advocating for. We're definitely not saying that we only need to work federally with the 17 to 24s. It would be ideal if there continued to be a national footprint for those under, and however it's funded, whether it's state buy-in or... And certainly state buy-in has worked in Victoria. There's the Springboard project that the Victorian federal government only went and did a closed tender to Youth Connections providers in Victoria to provide those services. So between the two, the states and the feds can work this out. It's just really important, I think, for us to pressure and to lobby so that our young people are very clear and visible in their mind as in the future.
Thanks, Rebekha. I'm coming to Jenny's question now, but just before I do, I'm sure that you're aware, and I'm wondering if other people have looked at it, that the Nationals policy in the lead up to the election actually had quite a bit of a focus on opportunities for young people in the regions. They seem to be quite acutely aware of the hazards for young people of limited options to access skills and opportunities for employment after school. So, you know, so some of those national seats are going to be, I think, good ones to be made aware of this program.
Well, we're going to be lobbying every member of Parliament. Now, providers will be asked and sent sort of letter ideas, because it does need to be local as well as us sitting sort of in a larger federal Canberra sort of position. National Party was very responsive to our Youth Connections Facebook page promotion that we did during the election period, because I believe National Party members see in their own area young people who really want to get a job, have a future, you know, get a good career behind them, even just getting regular work. And in so many regional communities where the services have shrunk around the townships, I know I live in one myself. We used to have several banks, we used to have everything in our town, and now there's lots of empty buildings. It's very, very hard, and it's right in your face. It's more in your face if you are a regional member of Parliament rather than if you're on the North Shore of Sydney. You don't necessarily see our Youth Connections young people. You don't necessarily see young people under 25 who are inactive.
Okay, I'm coming to Jenny's question now. Do you see a way to connect supports for 11 to 15-year-olds and the 16 to 24-year-old transition group?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Obviously, the current Youth Connections program works down to age 11, so we are advocating for our current program and for young people of that age group of school age to continue to receive services. for those over 17, there is a slightly different argument in the sense that they are most definitely a federal government responsibility. Many young people over 17 are already receiving Centrelink payments or youth allowance payments. So there's a good, strong argument that they are already on the Commonwealth purse, as it's often colloquially referred to in public policy terms, and therefore there is a responsibility of the federal government to provide assistance to them. It is a more complex argument when it is under 17, particularly in a government that has already questionably said, well, they are under 17. Are they a state responsibility? They are of compulsory school age. So that's where we're trying to change the thought process.
And that is where, the idea, the principle of when people leave school, the entitlement that they have to some kind of education and training support should follow them and go with them. That's the policy principle there that I think everybody is agreed upon. We've come to the end of the questions, and just in the last, I think we have 9 minutes left, I would like people to come up with any comments they've got. Now I'm conscious that I can recognise some of the names on this list here of people who've tuned in today. I'm interested in anybody who has had experiences of Job Services Australia providers in working with young people one way or another through Youth Connections. So what's your experience of JSA? Some of you might be also delivering JSA in your own organisations. What's your observation about Job Services Australia? I put our organisation's position on the relatively inhospitable environment that JSAs offer through no fault of their own for young people not in formal education last week. But I'd like to use this opportunity to find out from you what your thoughts and observations on that are. It's all right. Anything to say from anyone about JSA experience? I was interested to hear the Parliamentary Secretary, Scott Ryan, at last week's policy launch say we need to work out how to use Job Services Australia better. He didn't elaborate on that, but I think there's a lot of improvement. Renato, I hope I've got your name right. Have you, you're not muted. Do you want to give us your thoughts?
Great. I'm from the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition, and just wanted to note that, last year we did some research into Longterm and the effects on young people who had disengaged from education and employment, and also sort of did a survey with youth workers, and it was quite critical of the role of Job Services Australia. And sort of seeking improvements in the way that JSAs kind of work with young people, and that real need to skill up Job Services Australia in working with young people. So that all was launched in a report at the end of last year called Beyond Longterm. That's on our website. So just thought I'd mention that.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. I'm aware of that report, and we did talk to AAC about it. Amanda, you're coming off mute right now. Amanda?
Oh, hi there. Hi there. It's actually Matt. Although I'm just sort of listening on behalf of Amanda. So, can you hear me?
Hi, Matt.
Sorry, yeah.
We'll just call you Amanda.
You can call me Amanda. It's fine. It's my Friday night name. So.
Good on you. Way to go.
Yeah, look, I just making a comment on, I think what everything's been mentioned is really, really useful, and we're obviously dealing in, moving forward, difficulties in economic times, I would think, when it comes to funding and all that sort of stuff. But case management is something that I think is very relevant here, and I do believe, certainly, not that I work in JSA, but certainly even in DES here, that trying to reduce caseloads to provide quality case management is an ongoing issue. And I think a lot of young people, when they get trapped, certainly the disengaged young people, when they get trapped with services, or not trapped's the wrong word, when they get referred to services where they're another number amongst many others, it can actually be, just an extension or an ongoing issue. I think something that needs to be looked at really is if you're providing case management services, what's the realistic figure, and that sometimes is dependent upon needs of actual people. So I think overall, asking for comments, it's the quality of case management that seems to be something to probably look at moving forward. But that's just a comment. So
thanks, Matt.
Thanks.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Please do.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's quite obvious from a Youth Connections point of view when you're working with, normally the ratios may be around 1 Youth Connections provider to a maximum of 20 young people. You're going to be able to provide more to those young people than if you have 150 on your caseload. It's just completely logical. So that, I think that's a big part of the reason why the Youth Connections providers are able to get such good outcomes with their young people. It's clearly it's a time factor, and the more time you have to spend, quality time you have to spend with a young person, that's your best possible chance of getting that to connect to being an outcome.
Thanks, Rebekha. I've got Christine, who's been unmuted, and then 2 comments, and then after that 3 comments come in. So I'd like time to be able to let you all have those comments back. Christine, go ahead.
We're probably a really good example of a wraparound service in that we have Youth Connections, we're a training provider, we've got the C training, and we're also both a JSA and a DES. So no matter which bucket the young person falls into, we're able to service them and connect them between the various different programs.
Thanks, Christine. What's your organisation?
Nortec Employment and Training.
Ah, yes, Nortec. Okay, thank you for that. Suzanne has written, some JSAs still do not understand the ability to dual service and therefore don't encourage it. Thanks, Suzanne. Wayne says, our JSA uses Youth Connections for support services for their early school leavers, as the focus has in the main been on education rather than employment. Thanks, Wayne. And Matthew says, we have mixed success, but when we can get across the positives of partnershipping, we have had fantastic outcomes that have benefited all involved. The hurdle is breaking down the perception that we are competing against each other. And I really agree with that, Matthew. It's, the whole job service system is based on the premise of competition, and also one of its hazards, I think, is that it breaks up the available caseload between multiple competing providers in a given area, and that reduces their capacity to provide that specialist use service and staffing and expertise and modes of thinking and operating that clearly are a strength of the Youth Connections program. I think I'm going to hand over to Peter now to make the vote of thanks and wrap up.
Yes,
thanks,
well, yes, it's almost 1 o'clock, so I'd like to thank Rebekha for your presentation today. It's really given us a lot to think about, and you've given us some evidence there about the benefits of Youth Connections and of the importance of a national youth transition service. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending today.
Any questions?
And for your fantastic set of questions and comments. So thank you all.
Can I just say